Last week, a lot of my takes, a lot of my starts, they were childish. I realized I had to grow up. I had to put the quarter zip on. I had to put the Nike Tech in the trash. And now in week 12, I'm locked in and I'm loaded. We're giving the best start-sit advice. We're not going to go matchup by matchup. We're going to redeem ourselves from last week, and we're going to get right into it. Roll the intro. Let's start right away with some of the obvious quarterback choices that were going to be started no matter what. Jalen Hurts is playing the Dallas Cowboys. They give up the most fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position this year. Following that is Drake May, another obvious start, who's going up against the Cincinnati Bengals that are giving up the second most fantasy points to the quarterback position. These are the fantasy quarterbacks that realistically we are starting no matter what the matchup tells us, no matter what the game script or anything else says. We drafted these players, or for some of us, we added Drake May off waivers and it's been a success. You're rolling these players out no matter what. And if you have both, lucky you. The next two quarterbacks that I want to talk about with the next two friendliest matchups for the quarterback position, they may not be must starts every week. In my live stream, I told you to sit one of these guys last week. But nevertheless, Jacoby Brissett is going up against the third most points allowed to the quarterback position. That would be the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't really know what to make of this game, to be honest. I would expect the Jaguars to be up in this game, allowing more opportunity for Jacoby Brissett to throw. Does that mean 47 attempts or even 47 completions like last week? Probably not. This is a starting quarterback that we need to play this week in fantasy, and Jared Goff also fits this criteria as well. Jared Goff is going up against the New York Giants. They allow the fifth most fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. So even though these are guys that maybe in some of your leagues, like 12, 14-man leagues, you're must starting them regardless, these players have great matchups, and they will probably finish inside the top 10 this week. So I'm giving them the stamp of approval that these are must-start quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes against the Indianapolis Colts. This is a great matchup. Is it a top 5 in terms of fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position? Great. No, but it's Patrick Mahomes in a must-win game for the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, there was no question you were starting this player regardless, but you have my seal of approval. Upgrade him. Maybe he's even the best quarterback this week, dare I say. And even though we talked about the New York Giants giving up a lot of fantasy points to the quarterback position, the Detroit Lions don't find themselves too far away. So if Jackson Dart is active with his rushing upside that makes him a starting quarterback, the Lions give up the 11th most fantasy points to the quarterback position. This is considered what I would say a great matchup for Jackson Dart and game script to follow, because they may be trailing in this game. The Lions may be inclined to put their foot on the gas after last week's game Sunday night against the Eagles. They may be looking to score 28, 35 points, somewhere in that realm. And if that is the case, that's a lot of open opportunities or garbage time opportunities for Jackson Dart later in this game to go from maybe a 14-point fantasy day to a 22-point fantasy day. And that's what we want. And lastly, I want to talk about Caleb Williams as a must-start quarterback. Cardiac Caleb, Mr. Fourth Quarter, whatever you want to call him. Maybe I'll reserve Mr. Fourth Quarter for Bo Nix, but I digress. Pittsburgh gives up the 13th most fantasy points to the quarterback position, and an even better matchup for the wide receivers in this one, so maybe we'll talk about that at some point later in this video. But if it's a great matchup for your quarterback, it's an even better matchup for your wide receivers. We have a team that's probably going to need to throw in the fourth quarter to win this tight game. Check off all the boxes. Caleb Williams is must start, ladies and gentlemen. Let's keep it rolling. Let's talk about some of the best running back matchups we have this week in Week 12. And we'll start right here with one of my favorite rookies that I said to draft in the offseason. Travion Henderson is going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, and they give up the most fantasy points allowed to the running back position this year. Now, how will this affect with Ramondre Stevenson in the mix? Maybe Dearness Johnston is going to play in this game. Who knows how that backfield is going to pan out? But we can assume that at this point, Travion Henderson is going to get most of the carries. Sure, Ramondre Stevenson will be sprinkled in. He is a better pass blocker. I will not deny it. But I will say we've seen quite an upgrade and improvement in all facets of Travion Henderson's game, which leads me to believe that Travion Henderson is here to stay. And given the matchup, given the opportunities that may wind up his way in this game, Travion Henderson as a top 7 running back this week is not out of the range of possibility whatsoever. Although Travion Henderson was an obvious choice to be started, an even more obvious one would be Jahmyr Gibbs, who might have an explosion game against the New York Giants as they give up the second most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. We have yet to see, or I shouldn't say yet to see, it's been a while since we've seen the Jahmyr Gibbs explosion, and I would not be surprised at all if it was this week against the New York Giants, in Detroit no less. We should start to also see another obvious player, Saquon Barkley, get his feet back on the ground and run like we've seen him in 2024, because the Dallas Cowboys give up the third most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So we have a great player, Hall of Fame player, mind you, in a great matchup with the game script to run the ball, because they're probably going to leave the ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands as much as possible. I hate to say that, but we all know what it is. You don't need to be a fantasy football YouTuber to understand what's going on here. You can just watch it for yourself on the television every Sunday. I will skip over Woody Marks and the Houston Texans because that's a Thursday night game. This game already concluded. Hopefully Woody Marks has followed the trend of Buffalo gives up a ton of points to the running back position. But if that's not the case, let's talk about both Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet, who are going up against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans give up the 5th most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Add that to the fact that they've already mentioned they want to give Ken Walker the ball more. This could be a recipe for an RB1 Ken Walker game, something we've been waiting for all season if you drafted him. But I'm not going to say don't play Zach Charbonnet. If you need a flex this week, yes, he's a low-end flex play, but I still like the opportunities that may arise considering they prefer Charbonnet on the goal line. That just may not change. Finally, the last running back I want to talk about, maybe one of the last weeks that you can start this player with confidence, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And it's not because Alvin Kamara is a bad player. We just cannot trust this offense to get us first downs and keep Kamara on the field so we could actually have some opportunities at some touchdowns or some red zone opportunities. The Atlanta Falcons also give up the 8th most fantasy points allowed to the running back position, making Alvin Kamara must start, and this may be the last time that I say Alvin Kamara is a must start. It's been a hell of a career for you, my friend. Lastly, maybe this player isn't a must start player, but someone that I consider a sneaky start this week is Kenneth Gainwell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Since week 6, their bye was week 5, so after the bye week, he's averaged 4 targets a game in this offense. He is a prevalent role to this offense, and I understand he's only cracked 10 fantasy points one time in that stretch, but this is a player that they are relying on to sprinkle in a few carries, get the targets, get the receptions, and in PPR, that is a huge upside. So if you play in a PPR league, I would consider starting Kenneth Gainwell. Jaylen Warren, I think, is a must start, as he always has been, but a sneaky start nonetheless would be Kenneth Gainwell. Let's move on to the wide receiver position. The Philadelphia Eagles have the best matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. We talked about this with Trey Tucker and why Trey Tucker must have been started last week. I know we've already touched on the fact that Jalen Hurts does not get the opportunity to throw that many times in this video. However, this is too good of a matchup. A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are too good of players to be sitting. Unless you're in like a 6-man league, then sure, you want to sit one of them, fine, you probably have another one. But most of us play in a 10, 12, 14-man league, whatever the case may be, you cannot afford to sit these talented players, and they have the best matchup this week. Put them in your lineups. They probably were in your lineups regardless, but feel great about starting these Eagle wide receivers this week. The next obvious start would be Rashee Rice going up against the Colts. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. This should be a great game. Maybe this isn't a game where it's too much passing action for Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and maybe Travis Kelce, but the matchup tells us otherwise. The matchup tells us that this is going to be a game where you're going to have a Rashee Rice mega day. So put him in your lineups. He was going in your lineups anyway, but feel great about this wide receiver this week. If for some reason Xavier Worthy's questionable tag was to downgrade into an out, I would consider a must start would be Hollywood Brown, but otherwise keep it to Rashee Rice, keep it to Xavier Worthy, and let's move on to the next team. Chicago Bears wide receivers, Rome Odunze and DJ Moore, they are going up against the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a great matchup for these wide receivers. I believe that this is going to be a game that they may even be trailing in because they can't contain the run on the other side. Rome Odunze has not been performing for us lately. After the bye week, it's been kind of ugly. It's been shaky for us Rome Odunze fantasy owners. But nonetheless, this should be the get-right game. This should be Rome Odunze getting back on track to what we saw in the first few weeks of the season. We were like, damn, is this going to be a Rome Odunze wide receiver 1 campaign? I think that's the type of game you're going to get from him this week. I think if DJ Moore doesn't go crazy this week, maybe we even consider dropping him, honestly. Because if he's not going to get the job done in this game, when are we going to rely on him to get the job done for us? It's been all year long, we have not seen it. Next, I want to talk about DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and ironically, it's the same game, but the Chicago Bears give up the 4th most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. That is a great matchup for us. We have not seen the DK Metcalf explosion in quite some time, and I think this should be a game where he finally goes bonkers for us again in fantasy. Lastly, I want to sprinkle over the obvious star would be T. Higgins. You're starting him as a wide receiver 1 with Jamar Chase being out, but now if Joe Burrow's playing this weekend, Andre Yoshivas is a must-start wide receiver this week. This is a matchup that allows the 6th most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. This is a great matchup. If you have him, I definitely would be rolling out the Bengals wide receivers against the New England Patriots. This is a great matchup. Dare I even say it's going to be a negative game script where they have to throw to keep themselves in this game. I like Andre Yoshivas for those reasons, and obviously T. Higgins was a must-start. He has been a beast. Lastly, I want to give a sneaky start, because I did give a sneaky start at the running back position. I really like Wan'Dale Robinson this week against the Lions. We have a negative game script potentially with the Lions being up big on them. We know Jackson Dart has a rapport with Wan'Dale Robinson. We've seen it this year. They've looked very good together. I know Isaiah Hodgins came back last week and stole the show. Do not panic. This is still the Wan'Dale Robinson wide receiver room. Wan'Dale Robinson is a sneaky start this week, and I'd be throwing him in my lineups if I had him. Now let's talk the tight end matchup. It's been a while since this player has had an explosion for us this year, but Hunter Henry going up against the Bengals give up the most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. This is a great play. Drake May and the Patriots should put up a lot of points, and if it is a shootout, if this game does go the distance like it could potentially go with Joe Burrow at quarterback, you may see even more 4th quarter opportunities for Hunter Henry, something we haven't seen that much since Stephon Diggs has been on a heater. I won't spend too much time talking about him. He's the number 1 tight end in fantasy football right now. Trey McBride is going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Not much else to say here. The best guy, one of the best matchups. Let's just leave it at that. I do want to talk about Colston Loveland, though. Colston Loveland against the Pittsburgh Steelers gets my stamp of approval for a must-start tight end this week. Sure, he may not be one of the best 10 or 12 options out there, but given that he's playing the Pittsburgh Steelers get cooked every single week by the tight end position, it feels like. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to the position. This is a great matchup. Take advantage. Throw Colston Loveland in your lineups, and let's pray for the best. Even though this video is a must start, I do want to say temper your expectations on Jake Ferguson this week. I know since CeeDee Lamb has come back, George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb have dominated this target share, and it's left Jake Ferguson kind of pushed to the side and forgotten about. Nevertheless, the Philadelphia Eagles give up the least fantasy points allowed per game to the tight end position. This is going to be a tough matchup. I'm not saying you got to sit him and throw in some guy that you added on waivers this week, but just temper your expectations on Jake Ferguson this week. Do not panic. And why not? Why don't I sprinkle in a little secret sauce? Why don't I give you my favorite kickers to play this week? If you can grab Jake Bates, I definitely would grab Jake Bates. Tyler Loop, also a phenomenal option. Jason Myers is probably not available in your leagues because he's been like the best kicker as of lately. But if those 3 are not available for you, I don't know how to say his name on the New England Patriots, but Andres, please add him. Please start him. Do whatever you got to do to get this guy in your lineup. They're going to score a lot of points, the Patriots. That's just the bottom line. And between me and you guys, the wonderful fantasy football viewers of this channel, let me give you a little secret. If Eddie Pinheiro, who's been a stud for the 49ers, is out, the 49ers just signed Matt Gay to the practice squad. Matt Gay has had a very disappointing season for the Commanders, but you can't ignore or deny that the Commanders' offense hasn't really done much to help him out either. I think Matt Gay in a fresh environment. We know this kicker has played around the league and has been a successful kicker too on many different teams. If given the opportunity, if he is the starting kicker against the 49ers, I would roll him out and give him a chance. That's going to wrap it up for this video. Did I cook? Did I miss on every single pick? I bet you'll let me know in the comments on Sunday if I'm wrong. But nonetheless, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any fantasy football start-sit questions, fire them down in the comments below. I love to help out each and every one of you. Anyone that's a viewer of this channel, you don't even need to be a subscriber to get this help. Anyone that just wants to take the time out of their day to comment, I will definitely get back to you as fast as I can, and I will give you the best advice I possibly can. It's the least I could do. But maybe in return, you could subscribe, be a part of Outlier Militia. Doesn't really cost you anything, would make my absolute day. And if you're already subscribed, Outlier Militia, how you doing? Thank you guys so much for coming back and sticking around for another video. Make sure you smash that like button so I keep making bangers on bangers on bangers for you guys. But that's all the time I got for you guys today. The Quarter Zip Man with the plan is out. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy, and I will see you in the next video. Wow, you stuck to the end of this video? Thank you so much. If you're new here, make sure you check out one of these videos on the screen right now. And don't forget, before you leave, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any fantasy football videos on this channel. That's all I got for you guys. I'll see you in the next one.